Let us break bread together on our knees. On our knees. Let us break bread together on our knees. On our knees. We will all rise together with our face to the rising sun. Oh Lord, have mercy if you please, if you please.
This is the St. Charles History Chronicle, episode 2502. In this episode, Steve Gibson and Eric Krupa will be discussing St. Charles's role in the Underground Railroad, including some new information Eric has discovered. Brought to you by the St. Charles History Museum in St. Charles, Illinois.
We will all rise together with our face to the rising sun. Oh Lord, have mercy if you please, if you please.
This is Steve Gibson at the St. Charles History Museum, and this is History Chronicles. I'm joined here today by my faithful co-host, Eric Krupa.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever time it is for you gentlemen and ladies and everybody around the world.
And anyways, we're going to talk about a couple of things that are really kind of hot on the museum platform for us, at least the St. Charles History Museum. One of them is Underground Railroad, which lots of new stuff being found, and Eric's been doing a lot of research on that lately, so he's got a lot of interesting stories to share with us. And then a little bit later, we'll talk about our upcoming exhibit about the indigenous people here in the Fox Valley and some of the stuff that we're planning for the rest of the year on that. Otherwise, I'll kind of turn it over to you, Eric, and I'll jump in if I'll pretend like I'm the audience and ask questions.
Okay, absolutely, yeah. So lately we've been working on a lot of different museum things behind the scenes. We're getting our archives ready, photographed and recatalogued. We're also working on researching the Underground Railroad, which has really been obviously a hot button topic here ever since the history of the Underground Railroad in our town. It appears that we have a much larger role than was previously really recognized or written about, and we're just kind of digging a little bit deeper into that to figure it out. We're also looking to partner with the National Park Service, or I should say we are partnered with the National Park Service and their Network to Freedom program, which federally recognizes sites along the Underground Railroad and gives them a little bit of, not necessarily protection, but it gives more awareness towards the building. And it really is a beneficial thing for the community and for everybody around the area as well. We're not stopping at King County. We're not stopping at St. Charles. We're actually going to DuPage as well as DeKalb County. Right now we have museums and different entities from each county helping us nominate these sites because of the groundwork we've been doing.
Can I ask you a question? Because I think it's one of the things that always comes up is, let's talk a little bit about what Underground Railroad is and kind of how it got started. And I think, my understanding, and I'll let you kind of tell me what I'm wrong on this. I'll play the role again of the public. The Underground Railroad kind of occurred mostly during the Civil War, but predates the Civil War.
Oh, yes, very much,
and it is something that I think in a little bit that I've studied it, I think people don't understand the quantity of people, first off. I think I've seen estimates of 200,000 fugitive enslaved people who have, looking for freedom. I think the other thing that's kind of interesting about it that's been forgotten by history, which I'm sure you'll touch on, is the fact that there's a huge role played by the freed slaves or freemen societies that kind of existed very close to the borders of the southern states, slavery.
Yeah.
And then I think the idea of this as being a railroad, for example, which it really wasn't. And in fact, have you found any linkage with an actual railroad?
There's potential actually with the CB&Q down there. There's potential with the Northwestern line too, mainly because these routes all followed stage lines, which were kind of the railroads followed the stage lines eventually.
And I think there's probably some of that too, where I know there were a lot of people who were buying tickets to get on boats to go to Canada and things like that. So I can imagine people paying the fare for people to get on the train.
Yeah,
and
a
ride
couple stories, like Carolyn Quarles, she actually came up on a boat from Missouri, made her way up to Milwaukee there, and then actually had to make her way back down to our area to get to freedom, essentially.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, they would use any any means available, essentially, at the time, whether it be boats, people, overland routes. Predominantly, most people would get to Lake Michigan, and then they would get on a boat, kind of go around Michigan and head up into like Toronto and Ontario kind of area.
That was the goal. And so then the last thing kind of comes in, I think, which is kind of unique and interesting about the location that we have, is that you would think the best route, well, maybe the route everyone would choose would be the straight route, right? I'm going to go as fast as I can up to Chicago. I'm going to hop on a boat. And I'm going to get to Canada. But yet people in large part took a divergent route, which went all the way to the Mississippi, up the Mississippi. And then, and this is what to me is the amazing thing about this whole story. They had to know when it was they could turn inland, because Southern Illinois was very much a slave-holding friendly area still. And there wasn't a lot of support for them until they got up to like Peoria somewhere?
Yeah, once you get up into, the Rock River region's even complex there, but you do have operations, obviously. You have to be much more careful. As soon as you get into about DeKalb County, you're almost safe. And it never being fully safe.
Just to make the point, because of other things we may get into today, like the Dred Scott finding and stuff like that, it turns out that there's a lot of support for people, bounty hunters that are hunting these fugitive enslaved people who are trying to make their way north. There's a lot of support until you get about in the middle of the state or maybe a little bit further north. And then it kind of changed drastically. So if, for example, a bounty hunter would show up in the St. Charles area, they're not going to get much support.
They're not. They're
going to be sleeping under a tree somewhere if they're lucky.
They've showed up in DeKalb County multiple times. A $10,000 bounty was actually issued, which is extraordinarily high and kind of, a unique kind of situation. But yeah, they said some of the prominent men in town tried to assist the bounty hunters, essentially. But Deacon West, one of his friends, said that Mr. West was very skillful with a rifle, and he could hit a deer at long range. So they kind of backed off around the area. But in 1844 would be the first time in DeKalb County something like that was posted up, bounty poster essentially. And by 1850, after you get the Fugitive Slave Act in different parts of all these black codes in Illinois, it gets even more dangerous because now you have federal marshals coming after you as well, and they could deputize anybody. And if you were a sheriff and you didn't cooperate, you would have to pay $1,000 fine. If you did cooperate, there was usually some benefit into it for the person that did. So they were really trying to keep black and African Americans out of Illinois, essentially.
And that's not $1,000 in today's money. That's $1,000 in 1850 money, which I tell people it's like the Fugitive Slave Act. If you were caught, that was basically a life-destroying penalty that you had to pay. That was an amount of money that could ruin a farmer, and that kind of cash just didn't exist. So, and then the other thing about it was back in those days, I don't know why I'm laughing, but it was the era when you couldn't file bankruptcy. So if you couldn't pay the fine, you went in jail, and your family went to work to pay the fine in a poorhouse or something else. It's an incredibly dangerous time, and it only adds to the fact that here are people that may not know how to read or write, okay, who have, been given, in some cases, I saw things like compasses that had a scratch on it that showed them the direction to follow on the compass, that would take them. And then they had to get lucky enough to find the route beyond the route, get the people like Deacon West and others that would help when they finally got closer in and help them make the last transition. So, so that's kind of the background of how we get into the Underground Railroad, as far as I think of it, and why it's here. Why isn't it further south? Why is it? It's literally, this is where it kind of twisted to where the odds went much more in your favor. If you could get into DeKalb, you could get to Chicago.
One of the people we've really been focusing on, because he is the gentleman many people believe to have laid out the Underground Railroad in northern Illinois, is a guy named Reverend John Cross. He was a fiery revivalist preacher who showed up in Chicago in 1839. He gave a sermon, and he gave his excuse for getting pro-slavery people agitated, as he'd rather hear the devil roar than snore. So he was ready to keep people awake and ready. It didn't matter if they were coming at him negatively or not. He was actually arrested twice for operating on the Underground Railroad. He was incredibly open about it. And a lot of people, well, actually, it's believed that he didn't just set it out here in northern Illinois. He actually went out to Detroit, established that state road trail, which is the Overland Passage, as well as out in Iowa, where he eventually settled. His gravesite in South Dakota is actually federally recognized, but there are no physical, tangible homes or anything like that, except now we believe we found one in Batavia, Illinois. He actually owned the property from 1858 until 1868. Reverend John Cross preached at the Batavia Congregational and Dundee churches between 1859 and 1860. And of course, he was the first president of Wheaton College, which is known to be also a federally recognized Underground Railroad site. So we actually have some major players in this area, in the region, which have gone overlooked for many, many years just because this area, it wasn't necessarily secretive about it. It's just kind of got lost along the way because this line wasn't, it was a large line. It got hundreds of people to safety, but it wasn't as large as some of the other lines through our area. Like south through Aurora, the Princeton line, it went from Quincy to Princeton to Sugar Grove, Aurora, and then on to Chicago, essentially.
One of the things about the Underground Railroad is this story gets romanticized almost immediately in the 20th century, okay?
Oh, yes.
And when that happens, you and I have found this out over and over, it kind of tends to become simplified and almost cartoonishly to where,
Oh, gosh,
you know, you have this image that you see of people being taken care of stuff, and you realize it's, if you study it for a while, it's nowhere near that simple.
Oh, no, this is like the most complex thing ever. You have to know political, socioeconomical. You've got to know the land, the environment, routes that would be taken. You got to know that these could have been used once. They could have been used many times. Many of the routes that we get like one main route that we kind of point out, which usually follows a state road. So, for instance, Route 30 or Route 64, which is the well, let's see here. We have Route 38, which is the old state road from Galena, and then Route 64, which becomes the Oregon to St. Charles Road. Those two roads are huge around our region. And actually, it would cut up through that St. Charles kind of road there through Sycamore, come back down through Campton Hills, and then cut into St. Charles. But again, that's just one of the many different roads. There were many side roads, so we got to look back at old atlases, old, obviously, land records of the King County Recorder or any recorder's office.
And there's and the other angle is
romantic, yeah.
This entire thing of having an Underground Railroad or working on the Underground Railroad is illegal at every level of law,
absolutely,
right?
Yes, except for the higher law, which is what the Underground Railroad agents and many abolitionists believe. They believe that it's just a moral and godly kind of law. It's slavery is seen in the Bible as a great sin over many different religions. And honestly, the abolition and Underground Railroad movement in our region started with these radical preachers who were sent over by the American Home Mission Society. Many of them, they first got here in 1832 and 1833, 1829 to 1833. And they were known as the Yale Band or the Yale 12, but not all of them went to Yale. Some of them didn't. Actually, Lucian Farnham and Chauncey Cook are two, and John Cross as well, are all part of this kind of thing. And they set up not only the Illinois Anti-Slavery Society, but they also found the Illinois Liberty Party as well. So they're politically active as well as religiously involved.
Illinois, for example, you mentioned the Black Codes. And when I first started reading about this and learned, I forget the example, which farmer it was, but he basically wanted to free his slaves, but he didn't want to free them in Kentucky. So he came from Kentucky to Illinois. It may be Coles. I'm not sure if it's him or not, but he he decides to go from Kentucky to Illinois, and he tells his slaves, I'm going to keep you enslaved in Kentucky because that way I only have to pay the penalty when we get to Illinois. And if you'll trust me, that's what I'm going to do. And he does do that. But I don't think a lot of people realize that $1,000 that you mentioned earlier, it was $1,000 in Kentucky to emancipate your slaves, okay, or $800, I can't remember exactly. And then in Illinois, there was an additional bond you had to post as a freed slave when you came to Illinois, $1,000 when you got here. So we're talking $2,000 per person. This guy had like 12 or 13 enslaved people that he was bringing with him. That's, you know, a 13,000 times or 13 times 2,000 is $26,000. In today's money, that's $1 million. Okay,
Yeah.
without really pushing it.
Oh, it's probably, yeah.
Even more, yeah.
I mean, the normal farmer was making between 400. I mean, I look at the 1848 tax assessments and you see $600 for their total life savings and everything. So this would wipe them out. And in Illinois, it was actually curious. In 1829, they issued a law which would essentially, this is where you could be sold back into slavery, actually, to pay for the cost of a trial, to pay for the cost of jail time. And it even happened to one Caucasian gentleman, believe it or not, I read about, which was really interesting. But obviously, blacks were targeted specifically for this. And even in Yorkville in 1844, there's an incident where there's 3 gentlemen, they're merchants bringing pork up around the holiday season by sleigh. So they're taking what would that be? The Yorkville or Ottawa to whatever road there through Kendall County. But they get stopped at the property of George M. Hollenbeck, and he's like a judge in the area. He's known to be a little abolitionist leaning. And the guys that are pursuing them are enslavers from Kentucky, or they had been, and they had moved up into the region. So they actually kidnapped the poor black gentleman on the property of George M. Hollenbeck, but then they go to take him to the Justice of the Peace, and it's George B. Hollenbeck, or a different Hollenbeck, George M. So it's actually his nephew. And he tells them to get lost, essentially, go to a different county. I don't know what the heck this law you're talking about here, quote unquote, So they take him up to Yorkville, where the sheriff there is fully waiting to do this. He's going to legally auction off this human in the streets of Yorkville. Luckily, the abolitionists caught word immediately about this. Nobody dared raise a finger. They were not going to be caught trying to purchase a human here, except for Dr. Seeley, who was a known abolitionist and operator on the Underground Railroad, because the sheriff basically was like, if I can't get a bid for this gentleman, essentially we're going to bring him back to prison, and nope, nothing gets solved there. They're going to retry the auction. So Seeley bids $3. He gets the gentleman, and he immediately puts him on the Underground Railroad to be, sent to freedom. And this happens in Chicago as well, with a gentleman named Edwin Heathcock. But I don't know the Yorkville gentleman's name, unfortunately. But so very close to our borders around here, you had things like this occurring. It's not like in our town, luckily, or our area, there was no physical assault or anything like that, but there was emotional and different kinds of terrorist kind of thinking where they, in 1851, there's an instance here in St. Charles of a gentleman that was essentially scared off his property. He was saving up enough money working here in St. Charles for about 2 years, they quoted in the paper. And some of the neighbors around the area where he lived weren't happy by having a black family or a black man who was going to start a family kind of move in. So they scared him off, and the rumor was that, maybe he got taken back, all this. And there was a large debate actually in some other newspapers across the country. But the gentleman was obviously claimed as being taken on the Underground Railroad by the abolitionists, which is a good sign. And then the abolitionists say that they set up a family of 3 black Americans to sit in the house actually afterwards. So they went and they tried to reverse the role there. If you're going to try to get rid of people, we're going to bring more people. So it was a good show of solidarity and that kind of effort. But sad to witness, there's always bad actors everywhere.
Yeah.
This happened at Aurora as well in 1853. And these 2 gentlemen, they don't really have names. Most people, they go by, you get a first name like Jack or Jerry, which are these 2 gentlemen's names.
Well, I think the other thing that just kind of makes me think about this is getting an idea of the time. We're talking about 180 years ago. Okay. We're talking about, when did the UK make slavery illegal?
1808 or 1812 or something like that.
1812, I think it was. Yeah, it was. And we're 30 years after that, 30 some years after that. And we're in a state that literally didn't become a state until 1818, right? Illinois. All of this seems like it should have been.
Oh, should we actually bring that up? Speaking of the state of Illinois and the naming of our county? Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. Most people may not know this, but Kane County is named after Elias Kent Kane, who was not only an enslaver, but he was one of the gentlemen that fought tooth and nail to get slavery legalized in the Illinois Constitution, as well as in ratifications to the Illinois Constitution in the 1820s. The reason our county is named after this gentleman is frankly because he died. That's the only reason. So the state legislation is like, oh, there's this new county. There's enough people up here to do this, so we'll name it after our good friend.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is Samuel Lockwood of Batavia, who eventually moves up to Batavia. He's also there trying to fight, but he's fighting to keep slavery out of the Constitution. So you have this very kind of complex scenario where Lockwood is definitely an abolitionist. However, he upholds some federal black code restrictions on people and allows these people to be taken back. So where you are as an anti-slavery advocate and abolitionist depended on so many different things: religion, politics, what position you were in. So judges, people of legal position did participate all the time, but they usually were a lot more secretive about it. They didn't want anything to get out, and they're less likely to be agents.
And I mean, it's hard to make the point now, but let's understand how intrinsic and built in to our entire culture the thought of enslaving a person was.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
1619, you get your first 20 people.
Yeah,
Angolan.
it's not weird to anyone. It's not thought of. You could see people being led around in chains, and just the whole thought that today would seem bizarre. Okay, even when they did write something like the Illinois Constitution, when they wrote about not allowing people to be enslaved, they did include the clause that you could be enslaved legally for debts or as punishment for certain crimes.
Well, yeah. And in Mosaic County down south, they did legalize slavery for the people in the salt mines, but they were French, the descendants of the French, and they were grandfathered in until they died, essentially. So
Grandfathered in as slaves.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why I say, so that I think you need, and that kind of, now that shades everything else. So for example, Abraham Lincoln had a really tough time with the entire concept of it.
Oh, yeah.
When he was first starting out, and specifically being a guy from Kentucky, coming to Illinois, he was right in the thick of it when he was here.
Absolutely. And I mean, his wife, Mary Todd, obviously their family held enslaved people, and they had a certain perspective as well, which really, I believe, was her brother-in-law was influential on it. I'm not going to quote Lincoln because I'm not the best Lincoln scholar here, so I don't want to do that. But I could talk about John Farnsworth. He's an actual perfect kind of gentleman, and we can even tie in something we're doing real quick. So we'll take a little ad break here to speak about our new initiative. Earlier this year, descendants of the Farnsworth family actually donated a portrait of General John Farnsworth that was painted in 1868. It is a beautiful portrait. It's probably when he was a United States congressman. We're doing more research to figure out the artist and to see where the provenance is with that. However, there is a large tear throughout the portrait, so there's a lot of restoration work that needs to be done so the general could be restitched together, essentially, and repainted in a probably one of the best conservators in the country, Baumgartner in Chicago. That would be Julian Baumgartner. He is a fantastic, honestly, what he knows is beyond crazy. And you could actually view his work on YouTube Live. He does a lot of restoration work. He's got over 1 million subscribers. So we're looking at getting Farnsworth restored there. However, we need to get a new frame for him because the frame actually did not fit the original portrait. And we also need to get this restored. So we need about $5,000 to get this completely redone. We've been getting donations in, but any dollar amount helps. You could look this further on our website at stcharleshistorymuseum.org. But now we'll take a break from the ad break to go back to the breaking stuff. Breaking news. No, I'm kidding.
Well, let me. So the exact website, we'll put it in the show notes for this podcast, but it's STC Museum, all one word, stcmuseum.org, then / it's STG25. The STG is a kind of a cute way. It's called Save the General. So STG25, and that'll take you right to a page where you can donate, and that would be fantastic. It's like an unexpected gift, but it's an unexpected gift with a little bit of value that we have to put back into it here by restoring it. But I've seen it's a beautiful size print. It's not a small one. It's a fantastic thing. And I am very familiar with Julian and his work. And I think if you get a chance to see his YouTube channel, you should check it out.
Oh, absolutely.
So now back to our story.
All right. Now we'll talk about General Farnsworth here because he is a complex figure as well. He's always touted as a major abolitionist, really involved with the movement. And from the political side, he does become involved with the movement. But just like Lincoln, he isn't fully on board with racial equality or the stuff when he's starting out. In I forgot. Frederick Douglass came down anyway to give a speech in our region, and John Farnsworth actually started calling him out on the stage in front of people. He's saying, "What of it? Who cares that your family is being whatever?" And then Douglass actually set him straight there. And apparently, the story goes that at that point he went to Douglass after the thing. He apologized greatly. He's like, I'm going to put all my efforts now forward to working for the abolitionist movement, because Douglass, obviously a fantastic orator, but he lived that, and he actually was able to communicate these kinds of things to people that many weren't able to see. I would say he was very effective in that regard. But Farnsworth, he starts actually campaigning for the Lovejoy campaign in the 1840s, and that's his first entry into politics. And by 1852, he's now kind of giving huge speeches for the abolitionists. And by 1854, he is helping there right at the front with the Republican Party in Illinois. DuPage actually, I believe, had the first organization, and then Kane just a few weeks later, and then DeKalb like a month later or so. So this is all 1854. We're all pretty much one of the first 5 to 10 Republican parties in the entire country, which is kind of neat. But Farnsworth gets involved with this more and more, and he actually gets elected to Congress in 1856. 1861, he takes a break. He wants to go set up obviously Camp Kane. There's a little Civil War going on, so
In his front yard.
in his front yard, essentially, yeah. And then he comes back to do the politics for a while. But Farnsworth is more of a politician, so he even abandons the Republican Party at some point, becomes a greenback with Horace Greeley. And Farnsworth also, he was integral in assisting with some great privileges in the 13th Amendment, which is really cool to see if you look on his legislative stuff. But again, the racial equality, there's a quote somewhere where he says, I'm all for having people, whatever, but personally, I don't want to eat with somebody of that descent at my table, or I wouldn't want that at some other place. So he's somewhere in the anti-slavery realm, because we should talk about anti-slavery versus abolition.
Yeah, I was going to say there's one of the things that kind of becomes a point that everybody has to find. There's a spectrum here, okay? And it's weird because today you don't think this is a black and white issue. It feels like, although that's not a very good pun, is it? But anyways, it seems very clear to us where you would fall on this. However, for them, it has all these shades of what you're talking about. The thing is that any shade other than slavery being legal and allowed in the state is on the other side. Once you make that crossing and say that there should not be slavery in the new states, or there shouldn't be slavery here, or a person should be able to get freed and things like that, you've kind of broken through that wall, and you might as well go the full distance because you're going to be lumped in with that. And I think you mentioned Frederick Douglass. I think one of the things that's amazing about Frederick Douglass, he is this orator. And when he shows up in town and he speaks in front of these crowds and says the things that he says, people never expected to see an African-American man be able to present himself like that. They've all had to buy into this complete scenario of people that are too ignorant to do anything, or, share a table, as Farnsworth saying, or something like that. And I think Douglass is an example of where that happens, although Douglass doesn't even like the fact that he has to kind of be a circus act.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. He's more like he wants to be the person that's doing this stuff, not just acting
saying
the part.
it. Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's but God, the things that Douglass did for Abraham Lincoln, for Farnsworth, and everyone else, just by being Frederick Douglass is incredible. But then I think that's the thing that kind of makes this area here in St. Charles with the Wide Awakes and all the other people. And it's really what gets us Abraham Lincoln, because he makes that little tiny move into the anti-slavery thing, and it forces him to go all the way to the Emancipation Proclamation eventually.
Yeah.
Which I guess that's the good thing about it, right? If you were allowed to be like kind of mamby-pamby about it, I'm not so much worried about that. That might have allowed that to continue.
And that's what they experienced through 20 years of efforts, honestly. You could start at the Liberty Party, which is associated in 1840. They're the first abolition party. We should say, if you're anti-slavery, you have that perspective that slavery should end, but you don't really know when it should end, how it should end, why it should end. Maybe you want it for financial reasons to end, so it's not always it's a very shady gray area.
Well, it's actually a little bit of property law thing. Which is weird to talk about here, but this is one of those things like, where does the government have the right to tell a man what he can do with his property, whether it's his barn, his cow, his wife, okay, or the enslaved people that he got handed down or purchased? The government has no right to step into that man's life and tell him that. That's the feeling at the time.
Absolutely, yeah. And these abolitionists, they obviously, if you're an abolitionist, you believe that slavery should be abolished immediately, hence the term abolition, abolish. And this is fine, but many of these people didn't have the same racial kind of ideas of equality and such. And it's really the radical abolitionists that carry this kind of idea of racial equality, racial well-being, and all these kinds of, well, obviously slavery should end immediately. Some of them take a more militant perspective. Others take a more lenient moral persuasion type of perspective. And here in the Northwest, we really combine every kind of perspective, which is really unique. And we have such a strong Underground Railroad that it really, to quote Zabina Eastman, the Illinois abolitionists were never troubled by the problems in the East, like conflicting personas and personalities. To an extent, this is true. You could also blame the early abolitionists in Illinois for blending religion and politics and making the Liberty Party in 1840 and 1844 ineffective in a sense towards mass appeal. Once you get to the Free Soil Party, which is the next, it's all these people that don't want slavery to continue into different states, essentially. It's a more moderate platform. You gain more and more people. And then 1850, the Whigs call, they basically say, oh, wait, we're anti-slavery too. So then everyone goes back to their own parties. And by 1854, in this region, I mean, it is absolutely insane. I've got like, this will be the total between DeKalb, DuPage, and Kane counties. We're unique because Kane County and DeKalb actually won the free soil vote in 1848, which rarely happened across the entire country. DuPage just lost it, unfortunately. But so in 1848, you have 2176 total people voting for the anti-slavery party. 1852, that changes to 1383. And by the time the Republican parties formed in 1856 elections come around, you have 7,391 people for that and 1,835 for the Democratic Party at that time, which is just an insane differential.
Yeah, and for a brand new party like that.
Oh, especially.
Yeah.
But it really was these decades of work, and then they finally figured out the recipe, essentially. And not just that, they were forced to deal with the different stuff the federal government was enacting.
So we've got an Underground Railroad. We kind of back up to why we have it. It's basically the Underground Railroad is a synonym for facilitating the movement of fugitive enslaved people to an area where they don't have to worry about getting caught, and that's Canada.
Yes, Canada, essentially. But we should mention it's not just Canada. Down south, people went all the way to the Caribbean islands, Texas, California's. Well, California eventually becomes a state. So
Yep.
then they got to deal with that. But they move up pretty much all across anywhere they could get across a border to a different freer land, especially Haiti, because Haiti actually held the first successful slave revolt, enslaved person revolt. But that's what they say.
But in our area, that's where they're headed.
Oh, in our area, 100%. It's just Canada. They're not going anywhere else. When they cut through this, they're taking those. So they'll go along the Rock River routes to get to the stagecoach routes or the main roads. And then they would get reassembled here in the Fox River region. So there's like these two different kind of changing, well, I guess you could call them junctions. And our area is one of the major junctions because it's the final junction before you get to Chicago. Yeah. And not just that, you're getting people from down south as well as people coming in from this eastern route or west to east. And that one, many of the people around Missouri, like you said earlier, that strategy changes with people coming into the state because there's so much anti or pro-slavery pushback. And so people go around the Kansas-Nebraska border, kind of rally around that. Then they cut through Iowa and get as far northeast and east as they can to get to Chicago. So our region is really integral because we had that infrastructure early on. And we are just a location, a region that's perfectly suited for that because most of our settlers had this anti-slavery sentiment, at least.
So what's kind of new now and what you've discovered and what it is kind of being rediscovered is the fact that when we got downplayed in the myth making about what the Underground Railroad was in the early 1900s, let's say, they kind of left out DeKalb County. And by leaving out DeKalb County, which there's a great book about that I was reading, I think you shared with me, which really makes the point. You know, they had like like single digit mentions of being part of the Underground Railroad, 5 or 6 things they could find. When you do the research, like you said, it turns out that we're one of the major routes. But by leaving DeKalb County out, it reduced the number of people that could deliver to
So
St. Charles.
you missed your puzzle piece right there. And
Yeah.
this actually goes back. I mean, this was reported in the news multiple times. 2000s, Marilyn Robinson of the Daily Herald, I believe, wrote a report about the Bartlett article. So I think we should bring up Bartlett right now because this is actually a perfect. We'll use an example and we'll take you across the route, essentially from Albany, Illinois, all the way to Chicago. And we could do that because of Joseph Bartlett and his recollections. In the newspapers in 1889 and 1891, Bartlett wrote about his recollections as an agent on the Underground Railroad locally. But not just to mention those two sources, because in DeKalb County, without those sources, you can't substantiate this, because Bartlett's actually one of the easier ones to trace because of his outspokenness, and he's actually an abolitionist dating back to his days in the 1830s at Andover College of Phillips Academy in Andover. He participates in the anti-slavery riots there. Moves out here eventually, becomes involved with the Liberty Party in Roscoe, and then moves down here to St. Charles in 1843. So for a long time, the people from Sycamore or Mayfield actually delivered the people to St. Charles without stopping, essentially, or they tried, they would feed their horses or whatever, but from what I've read, they did make that trek. But Joseph P. Bartlett, he was just a normal farmer, a gentleman that was also a teacher a long time, and his house was perfectly situated kind of near the road. It's off of Beath Road today. So it would cut down from the Sycamore roads, and you would take one of those trails to get onto Route 38, which then went into Prairie Street. And if you ever wonder why Prairie is that wide, it's because it was used as a stagecoach route, essentially, for the Galena Trail, I believe, right? Because that is Route 38.
Well, the whole, what becomes Campton Hills Road. And
yes, that's all dredged out there.
That's all that. And that's why Garfield Tavern exists out there.
Exactly.
It's a stagecoach stop.
And that's another spot. The Garfields and the Richmonds over there were heavily involved as well. So there's speculation as well. We got to do some further digging to substantiate that. But Moses Richmond has been named as also a conductor. But Joseph Bartlett, his story is important because in 1880 or 1891, he writes about his final actions on the Underground Railroad. And he brings us to a date of February 1st, 1859, which, I mean, thank you. We have an end date for this line, or at least his route that he participated in. I actually know that it goes further than that. But Bartlett talks about these two ladies that come to his place in the middle of the night, essentially. They're 18 and 20, and their names are Eliza and Celia. Or Cecilia Grayson. These two ladies were actually going to be sold at the first slave auction in Nebraska City. And the state essentially was still, or it was forming at that time. So they said, no, you can't do it. We're going to call that off. You're going to get too much pushback and stuff's going to happen. So their enslaver was going to take them to St. Louis to basically sell them there. And when they heard that, they were out. They left in the middle of November, which is not an ideal time to leave. And they march 528 miles in the cold over 3 months. And all this time, they're being pursued by a mob of 200 men with pitchforks, guns, and literally a mob for $200 for their recapture and brought back to the Knuckles family. What's even weirder is the Knuckles have a county named after them in Nebraska. Yes. But for so many years, the Grayson story was they make it through Iowa, they make it into Albany, Illinois, and then their story goes blank. Celia shows up, or Liza shows up actually in Chicago. She unfortunately lets loose that she was a freedom seeker to the wrong person. And then the Knuckles actually come up with the mob again, like a few people to search, and they physically find her. They physically drag her down, I believe, Clark Street or something like that. But the abolitionists hear her screaming because there's a lot in Chicago in that time. And they are like, whoa, stop this. They get a whole mob kind of to stop it, but they get the cop to come out here and break it all up. And the cop, instead of just arresting Celia or one of the men, they arrest both of them. They bring him to the Sears Tower, which at that time was the Armory. And they basically have him cool off there while they come up with a plan to free Celia. Or, gosh dang it, it's Eliza. But they get this idea where they're just going to bring her out. The mob's going to sweep her away, essentially, and take her on the Underground Railroad. And that's exactly what happens. They bring her out kind of with a dainty grip to say, oh, here, get through the mob, get through this, everybody out of the way. And then, oh, no, what happened?
She's gone, man.
She's gone. But yes, they took her on the Underground Railroad. But for many years, nobody made the connections between all these people. And it actually turns out Joseph Bartlett wrote about his instance of assisting the Graysons on their journey to freedom. He says that Ira Nichols of Mayfield brought them down to Joseph Bartlett's house, and he brought them to the home of Robert Finley, who we know is actually heavily involved with the abolitionist movement, and we could actually tie his home, which still exists now, to these named persons, especially people that have been written about academically a lot. And we are now that missing link that we're able to connect it.
Great.
And throughout decades, this is how you kind of build up these routes on the Underground Railroad, all these different stories. So like to build it up from Albany, that's one story. So they're entering in Albany at some point, and it's true. Because these routes change every year, essentially. A new station could be disused, re-upped. Like Bartlett was just drawn in the middle of the night one night into doing it. People knew that he was an abolitionist, and they were like, could you help us out, essentially? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And that's how he got wrangled into it. But to get Celia and Eliza in their story to make it complete is really special, especially because we're working with Barry Jurgensen, who is now the acting head of the National Park Service Network to Freedom program. And he actually walked the whole 528 miles because he's from Nebraska. And it was honestly an amazing story. He raised money for survivors of domestic assault and abuse and trafficking. Because slavery still happens today. It's just in different perspectives as well as different countries, of course, as well. But to have the Graysons here and to get it piece by piece, you have the idea now it's Albany to Mayfield to Campton to St. Charles. And then you get another story about a guy named Solomon Shaver and how he goes through Ogle County and Polo and Buffalo Grove onto Byron. And then you read about, oh, they're coming from Byron now, so now you're piecing this up. And you realize, okay, they're taking this road into the area, depending on which city they want to enter in, which is safer, who has room. And they would follow the main road of the Rock River up north, kind of. You wanted to avoid Mount Morris, Oregon, and Grand Detour, apparently. Those places held a lot of Maryland-based people who were actually, Maryland was a border state, and these gentlemen were pro-slavery. So you get this trip from Byron, and actually the gentleman goes through Mount Morris because he's really, let's say he's really pizzazzy. He even has a banner and he's waving it through. He's like, come and arrest me, because he has a gun. He's ready. He just wants somebody. He wants an excuse. This one, Solomon Shaver. But he gets through there, and then they say, oh, from Byron, we stayed for a few days, had a 4th of July party. And then we went to Lake Mayfield. And now you're like, oh, okay, so the Nichols. So now you got Albany from the one story, then you got up the Rock River to Polo to Byron from that story into the Mayfield. And then Mayfield's a place, so you go down. Sycamore, of course, is heavily involved, and you just follow the trail. Obviously you get Lombard on the way out east, and Glen Ellen, Hinsdale, Wheaton, all these different places.
Oh yeah. And I think one thing that, as you're saying that, it reminds me that I don't know if it was the Graysons or not, they actually got on the boat, had tickets bought on the boat, and there were actually bounty hunters on the boat that they had to be hidden from while they're going to Canada.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So I think all of this stuff, does it peak just as the Civil War starts, or is it really kind of almost steady going from early 1850s all the way up till 1860s?
So it definitely actually predates all these periods here, and obviously goes back to the first time of basically when the South was established. There would be people that had to find literally their own way through the wilderness to find freedom. So this has been something that had happened, but the formal establishment in this region happened 1839, 1840.
Yeah.
Our route, from what we could gather right now, is 1842. So it's an earlier route, very early, and we had a lot of active radical people. including Thaddeus Hurlburt, who taught here. He actually preached here. He was with Elijah Lovejoy when he died. He actually was with Elijah Lovejoy's body until 3 a.m, making sure that the pro-slavery people who killed him wouldn't desecrate his corpse. And if you don't know, Elijah Lovejoy kicked off a lot of the abolitionist martyrdom because he was printing anti-slavery stuff in Alton, Illinois. He eventually gets massacred and murdered. His printing presses are burned down by pro-slavery people. And then that inspires his brother Owen Lovejoy to become a huge abolitionist and heavily involved. And actually, Lucian Farnham of Batavia gets Lovejoy his position at the Princeton Church. So these people are all connected. And when you get one connection, you kind of get able to find everybody associated, the usual suspects.
And it's funny because when you're looking for this, when I first got involved with history, especially here in the St. Charles area, you're looking for tunnels and you're looking for secret rooms in people's houses and, a single board that, was it a shelf or was it a place to sleep and everything else? And then you realize that's like the simplest version of this. The complicated thing was they used every form of transportation they could use, okay? They used every connection they had. And if they gave you, let's say, for example, you're not a person who wants to be part of the Underground Railroad, and you show up at my door with a couple of African-American people and you say, can you do me a favor when you're going into Chicago to pick up your supplies? Can you just take these people with you, okay? If the story's okay and solid, that's what people would do. They may not be a person that supports an Underground Railroad.
Yeah, there are definitely people that get involved or people that are friends, neighbors that would assist in DeKalb County. It's actually really, we could go to W.P. Deo or D-Y-E-O up there. For everyone he helps, he actually he uses his hired men to do it. He hires James Purcell and Will Byers, or Byers is involved in South Grove Village there, which is west of Mayfield, and then Mayfield, and then Sycamore. Sorry, yeah, I know.
So they're not even spending the night if possible.
No, or Ira Douglas in Mayfield's a perfect one where he would, if anyone, in a pinch or something, there would be those people. So you weren't. There's agents and conductors, and I don't know if this is me using linguistics or whatever, which is which, but I usually think of the conductors as more of the steady, reliable ones that were leading the movement.
Yes.
Then you get your agents who are involved either monetarily, they're funding it, which is a huge portion. People do this, and they're fine with doing that because it's not, you're not directly involved, essentially.
But probably no linkage to you if anything legal happens. And
Exactly.
So then that all kind of, to me, that builds this wave of stuff that, especially in the north, the further north you get, that makes that more of a thing that you might want to be involved in, okay?
Oh, absolutely.
Now, but I think the other thing that's interesting is that even when the Civil War breaks out, we're not done with this. Until the Emancipation Proclamation kind of puts an end to it near the end of the Civil War, everybody still has to kind of worry about this.
Yeah.
You could still, the law was still out there.
It was still going on Elgin, actually. They have the only registered site for the Network to Freedom. Great job, Elizabeth and everybody up there. Want to give you a shout out. It's a Newsom Park, and actually in 1862, there was a train that was shipped up with freedom seekers. It's called the contraband train, quote unquote. But, mid-war people that are basically fleeing, that's chaos down there. So they're running and they're trying to get out of there. And that actually builds the black population of the Fox Valley extraordinarily. And then when the 1870s come, there's much more industry, and that kind of builds the population. But early on, there weren't many black people to associate with in our region if you were a freedom seeker. So we do have that kind of stereotypical, the white person coming guiding from place to place. But that's not true everywhere, as we were talking about earlier, especially because black liberation, and even in the Chicago, in one of the stories, Daniel Miller brings these people over from Aurora down to Chicago. So they get to Chicago and they find that these enslavers, Daniel Miller does, are basically all around these safe houses, Philo Carpenters and Charles Volney Dyer, who are two major players in Chicago and actually help run the Underground Railroad altogether. So they actually put them on the guy's roof, and they have a couple guns, and they say, shoot if anybody tries to come up. It doesn't matter who, just shoot. Which is, oh my gosh, you're being put in this position as somebody.
What year is this? This
is 1852 at least, because Miller, he only preached in Aurora for a brief time, 1850 to 1852-ish. So while this is happening, these people are looking for them everywhere. And what Philo Carpenter actually does, or Philo, sorry, whatever you want to call him, he gets the help of John Jones, or not John Jones, but there's a notable barber in Chicago, and there's a notable tailor that works most likely for John Jones, let's be honest, who's a huge black abolitionist and richer than nearly 99% of anyone in Chicago at the time. But they get there this mob of 40 black people to essentially deter these people while they push this person into like a safer spot. They try to get him on a boat at this point, and they literally it's just a whole black kind of community coming together to protect these people, to get them away. And nobody was going to mess with like 40 heavily armed men, even if you were like a dozen or so people trying to mess around to find them. So they were able to get them through that kind of power and connections. In Chicago, you get more of that kind of diversity, as opposed to out here where it is mainly, maybe we had like a total of 5 or 6 settlers that were black. People actually came with the Wilson family. They were known to be abolitionist leaning as well. So there is the possibility that this gentleman, who then later just kind of goes on his way, may have been involved with them, but there's nothing to certify that, at least at this moment. So we really had a scarce population. So we take that kind of traditional Underground Railroad sense until we hit Chicago, and then you kind of get much more black involvement, or other parts that had a larger black population.
I think, like New York, Chicago had a larger freedmen population too.
Yes.
And I think I know Stevens Jones. He is rumored to have had an African American guy that came back with his with Bundy. Was it? Or
Yeah, Bundy and his son. His son actually went down. I don't think Hiram Jones, but then, or not Hiram, but either way, they come back with, a lot of people do. Farnsworth even does, with either black volunteers, or I really don't know. They're hey, here's one step essentially above enslavement by being my personal assistant for the rest of the war, and then you could come live with me afterwards and be my personal assistant there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it carries out through basically the whole Civil War until the end. I mean, 1862, 1863 is kind of what we get for our ending dates. And mainly St. Charles and Aurora are the 2 major spots. Elgin does get some people as well, but people didn't want to travel all the way north, essentially, but we do have people saying that. So one of those routes definitely went on for a little bit longer, I believe.
So just because I know this is something, especially for people in St. Charles, Joanna Gartner, is it Gartner or Garner? I never get it.
Gartner, yeah,
with no T.
Yeah, with no T there.
And I don't know that I really understand her complete story yet, or I don't know.
I'm still trying to learn it too. So she was born in Halifax, Virginia in 1798, and I believe she was born enslaved, obviously. She ends up in Missouri because we know her 2 children are born there enslaved, Lenora and Lamanda. And actually, I believe that picture that we have might be one of them instead of Joanna, just based on the date. But that's nevertheless, it doesn't matter. They come in through Moline, Illinois, which is a spot many people did come in through. And that way they could take that orange route or the blue. Well, I like calling them orange and blue line just because we're Chicago. One comes northwest, one comes southwest. So
yeah,
makes it easy. So ours is the blue line, essentially, that cuts through St. Charles. And the orange line cuts through Aurora. So they had the opportunity to do that. Maybe they stayed in the area, some helpful region around there. But they said around 1865, the close of the war, they migrated up to St. Charles. So there's potential that they found employment down there. It would still be a hotbed kind of area, the Rock Island, Moline region. It was a huge spot people came in, but also, you're still having that kind of risk of being caught, of being brought back across the border into Missouri and other places further down. So it wasn't like, there's a lot of research that we still need to do about the Gardners, but they've still got a fantastic story about how they ended up here.
I mean, the evidence
2009,
yeah, the evidence, I mean, that she literally gets given a home near St. Charles downtown, what would have been close within the regular city limits of town and things like that. I mean, it seemed like there was a lot of welcoming there. And then, of course, her grandson, William Luckett, and the important part that he plays in St. Charles and in a lot of different ways. But I think it does speak a lot to the situation in St. Charles, that this isn't the place where people stopped on the railroad. There wasn't the opportunity here for them to stop. This was a station on the Underground Railroad. You went on to where you were going and everything else. This was,
Exactly.
I don't want to make it into a racial thing though, because I think from my studies of the late 1800s in St. Charles, every city was insular like this. I mean, people from
Yeah, this
Geneva,
whole region.
St. Charles, you really had to have your roots here in a lot of different ways, or else you had to have a good reason for being here. Okay.
Yeah, because if you didn't settle, come pioneer out here, why? Not to say that, but like, why come out here if you're not looking for a better opportunity or something like that? And we didn't have that industry yet. We were just like that sleepy, idyllic town, essentially.
Yeah.
And many people, we didn't have all that stuff going for us yet. At that time, honestly, it wasn't. It was opportunity for employment, which is, and also something that these people never had experience before. And you're telling me I could get paid for, and I know it sounds terrible and horrible, but it really was the perspective of, and that's why the radical abolitionists were so involved with trying to get racial equality pushed together with anti-slavery, was to bring black people up to the, as they say, what was it, like moral, educational, and intellectual, to judge people based on self-worth alone and not color of skin. So they were really trying to get education popularized for Black Americans, and they were allowing Black Americans to have the soapbox to speak on as well. Here in St. Charles, you had many Black orators. We didn't have Frederick Douglass, but Aurora and Elgin did, and we had, there's so many abolitionists that came through, it's irregardless.
Yep.
But we're really just, in that sense, we do kind of follow that traditional Underground Railroad narrative. But people would work during the day, at night. And when we talk about the tunnels and stuff like this, it's possible that it happened completely. There is physical evidence for these things. Was it the primary means of hiding people? No, it was most likely a last-ditch resort, or most times we hear people, they'd sleep in the barn or they'd sleep in the corn crib over there. And then they would come in the house during their meals to kind of hide around. And if things got bad, then they would go to a hiding spot. So there's a spot, the Marsden home, which actually has a dugout. It actually was owned by the Wards, or the Youngs, which are a notable abolitionist family. And then it went to an English tailor or a shoesmith who was working with Underground Railroad agents. So it's presumed that this cellar here in St. Charles, by the way, I'm not going to say where just because I want to be polite.
Yeah.
But this cellar was excavated in 2011, and they found substantial evidence to tie it with an Underground Railroad site, which is something that's incredibly rare because physical evidence doesn't really exist for these in many cases. Usually cisterns, wells, things like that. You could also hide people in for a short time. So many people had these in their basements as well. No,
Yeah.
no, but
So it, we could talk about this probably for like weeks. Okay. And I think as more and more stuff comes up, we'll have an opportunity to revisit this and maybe talk a little bit more about it. But, in terms of the impact on a lot of things that are going on, for St. Charles, we kind of find ourselves in the sweet spot here, right? General Farnsworth is here in the area. We've got people like Judge Barry and others who have been part of this, making the Republican Party, which makes us kind of a center of things that are going on.
Barry also allegedly, from what I've read, I mean, he funded and helped freedom seekers. They said that people used to ship them up like old Kentucky bourbon afterward, just bourbon in general. Well, it's not bourbon if it's not from Kentucky, right? No.
Yeah.
But so these people would, in gratitude, essentially ship this back up, and we're still looking into Barry's involvement, honestly, because these names pop up all the time, and each one you have to take the time to really dig into, which makes it such a tasking kind of thing.
Well, at surface level, there has to be, because you don't have somebody like Judge Barry who's involved in all of the things of legal things that he is involved in, and the people that he has represented in court and things like that. It, but you have to find the evidence. We always have to find.
Oh, like the Wheeler family. Let's talk about the greatest example here in St. Charles, which is what actually got me started in 3rd grade. Another shout out to Mrs. Lewis, my teacher at Geneva at Harrison Street Elementary. She got me all excited about the Underground Railroad as a kid, with the Wheeler House being mentioned, even though we're from Geneva. They mentioned St. Charles. So for everyone knows the story that the Wheelers were involved. They have a tunnel underneath their house that helped freedom seekers get there. And the Wheelers are unique because we don't have a story to tie them to, like an individual freedom seeker story or a name or anything. What we do have is a ton of secondary evidence and primary evidence, I should say, as well as some secondary evidence. And we really, the Wheelers, James T. Wheeler and Jerusha Young, they were married. The Youngs, Wheelers, Moody's, Wards, and Fearsons are all pretty connected through blood. Eventually, they all kind of marry each other. And they're all very into the abolitionist movement as well. Robert Moody especially, until he dies early, unfortunately. Oh, his son dies early. He dies at a respectable time in his life. But, and then the mom dies too. It's really sad. But James T. and Jerusha were from New Brunswick, Canada. And many of these people came from this area in New England. These Yankees, essentially, came from spots that were affected by the Great Awakening. So they're very religious. They're these, where you get the fire and brimstone ideas of speeches. But you also have these radical religions coming up that tolerate this type of stuff, that this should be how it should be. And they really take a stance against slavery, and then others don't, and then conflict ensues. But for the Wheelers, they were strict Baptists, and actually Wheeler actually acted as the town's Baptist preacher for 1 year by the Baptist Society. So I found that out. That was kind of neat. But he was heavily involved from that religious side of things, that slavery was an evil. And in 1834, they built their first home, which was a log cabin, which is kind of where Fearston Creek Fen is now. It's obviously swept away. I actually got swept away in 1849 during one of the great ice floods there. And mainly because the dam was put back there, that area would flood constantly, and Wheeler got upset. He actually sent a bunch of lawsuits. I mean, throughout generations, there's lawsuits for the flooding of his property. But so he moves his house, and everybody in 1843, they build an addition to the log cabin. And we know that that log cabin was for sure used as an Underground Railroad station because his son, Hiram, as well as his son, Kettridge Wheeler, or Hiram Kettridge and James Brainerd, who goes by Brainerd Wheeler. All these three people talk about their father's efforts and escapades during the Underground Railroad time, the abolitionist movement. They say my father was the one abolitionist in town that really would say that, and I found out that being an abolitionist was to be laughed at on the streets and stuff like that. There's another quote that says to be an abolitionist was like nothing like being a socialist now, and this was 1908. So, I mean, just carry on the analogy there, essentially. The Wheelers, it's interesting because Kettridge Wheeler becomes a reverend. James Wheeler just kind of becomes James Wheeler and owns that property, or James Brainerd Wheeler. And then the other one becomes, we got preacher, newspaper editor, and another gentleman. And they're writing, Kettridge Wheeler writes in the Saturday Evening Post a couple articles about his father, how he used to cry reading Uncle Tom's Cabin to the kids, and how it was regularly used as a station on the Underground Railroad. And we have all these different recollections, including Kettridge also writes to W.E.B. Du Bois, like no big deal.
Yeah,
like,
right.
hey, my father, first sentence, he says, my father was an abolitionist, where it meant to be one, where he was really, so pre-1848 is usually what they say then. And he's just writing to W.E.B. Du Bois, basically backing his ideology about immediate black improvement. It's a really fascinating letter, and actually is used to be taught a lot about the Booker T. Washington debate, which I found out about. Not the debate, but that's been used and referenced as such. And then you have the family members, like the granddaughters. They have oral recordings of these people and letters that they wrote. So we've got letters saying, yeah, Brainerd or my dad used to tell me all the time about the stuff that would happen. You have all these ideas of a tunnel, which is great. The Wheeler family is known because of that tunnel there. That's essentially their leads to the basement. And while it's possible that there is a tunnel under there, it was likely a little bit different. They lived on a gravel hill when they rebuilt their house. They built it actually just before it got swept away, so good timing.
Yeah, right.
And they moved up on top of the hill, and underneath the ground there is a basement cellar that once did lead to the outdoors, 100%. I got the photos from the interior. Steve and I were lucky enough a few months ago. Thank you, Alex, for letting us actually go out there. Real estate agent out here, Alex Ruria. It was great. Yeah. And we got to see the Wheeler house and see what the heck are there tunnels, what's going on here. A lot of it's been cemented over and redone in future generations, but There's that outdoor line, and you could see it in the photo we have from the 1880s, 1890s, where they're sitting in front, and that same exact door is right there in the front. It's possible that something led up to that door, but now there's that huge porch with the different pillars on it that's blocking that whole kind of entryway.
Well, it's also, I think, one of the things, I tell people this all the time when they ask about it. We live on the banks of the Fox River, okay? Almost everything here, except for right near downtown, there's a hill that goes up either side.
Yeah.
In fact, even downtown, if you're down on Riverside and that area there, the altitude changes significantly.
Oh, we're on top of the hill. Let's just take a look out the door, yeah.
So one of the good things about that is that if you're in your house, let's say 2 or 3 streets away, or like the Wheelers on top of the bluff there, if you dig down 20, 30, 40 feet and you make a hole in your basement, and then you make a connecting tunnel out to the river bank, okay, you can drop your trash, your everything else. You can make a pile at the bottom there and then shove it down to the river, which was the disposal system for this entire area.
Essentially. And down there, I mean, they've found archaeological evidence in the past of different fragments of glass and all this junk from Wheeler's era, essentially. And then an ice house got built on that same kind of location later. But
vice versa. If you're going to bring something into the house, you bring it into that hole, you put a pulley up at the top, you haul it into the house, you don't have to carry it up a long road.
And if you go by the Wheeler house on Route 31 there, you can see those steps leading up, and you could see that there's, something's been dug out at some point. Obviously, work's been done on the road, but there's to pinpoint to what, when, where, it's very difficult, especially as the building burned down in 1928, leaving nothing but the bricks and the original structure kind of intact. The door in the basement survived, which is actually really cool. They still have the original door down there.
Yeah, and I know they've got I always pointed out at the cemetery, the Wheeler stone there, which is one of those zinc headstones. Actually says right on it that the foundation for this is actually stones from the fireplace or the chimney at the original cabin.
And to them, like the Wheeler family, they almost see their cabin as this, like, not holy place, but like the place that ties everything together to them generationally. And like to have that, I mean, there's only one company at the time that actually made the zinc headstones, which is fun. I think they're in Connecticut or somewhere up there. But to have that all laid out in detail, like they have a sketch, an entire etch of their log cabin, as well as the addition from 1843 on there.
Yeah, it's great.
It's just shows the testament to what they believed as that home. And then, of course, the other family members are saying the same stuff about their fathers and how they were all involved.
So it isn't like we're surprised at the Underground Railroad. I think, to me at least, the surprising fact is to find out that we may be one of the focus points for a lot of that activity. Yeah. Then when you tie that in with the Whigs becoming the Republican Party, and you realize that that's kind of powered by this abolitionist, anti-slavery moment, there's some pretty cool things that happen here in St. Charles because of all of this. And to regain that history now, I think that's great, the work that you're doing to regain that, because it, again, puts us on the map for something other than the Norris Gates money or something else. We've got a lot of history at different levels and a lot of fun things that this town
does. Absolutely. And what's great about what we're doing with this research is with the National Park Service right now and their Network to Freedom, we've what you have to do is essentially fill out a form that's similar to a historic register place. It doesn't have the same stipulations, so if you're a landowner, done nothing, you don't have to worry about anything. You could set it to private, and nobody will be able to know, essentially. But if you do want to be involved, let us know. We could research your home, obviously, to figure it out. But as part of this Network to Freedom program, you're entitled to specific grants to help your house, actually, if it's deteriorating. In that case, you do have to follow some rules that are set out by the federal government. But you could also get access to having like a passport stamp if you wanted from the National Park Service, as well as a signage out front, of course, those big metal signs that are really hefty and, they really denote the spot. So any of these could qualify for these types of benefits, as well as just pure tourism. In a way, this is honestly a great opportunity to, I don't like the touristy type of stuff, but I love to promote this history. And the fact that it hasn't been totally, it hasn't been gone through yet, essentially. We're kind of doing that work. I want to give a big shout out to Jean Angel Schultz, who actually was our director, and like right before 2000 we moved here. She started that study on the King County Anti-Slavery Society, which really evolved into this whole movement, along with Glenette Telly Turner, who was one of the founders of the Network to Freedom, believe it or not, which is great. She's from Wheaton. We want to give a shout out also Lisa E. Brown and Zach Bishop. We've all, honestly, everybody's been so helpful here to kind of piece this together because it does take a community effort.
Yeah.
We got so many sites alone. And what I want to say is we can make up 10% of the entire national Network to Freedom, which currently has over 800 sites. We could get somewhere between 50 to 80 registered, at least from what we see. So cemeteries count, bridges count, roads, farms. They want to know the history of the land. Even if some things are torn away and gone, they will still probably accept it if there's enough credible evidence. So we've been working there, and we'll be having public workshops. So keep your eyes and ears open. We'll be having Barry Jurgensen actually come in person to give a workshop as well. So the head of the entire program will be here, which is something very nice. But those dates are to be determined with that.
Great. Well, and to find out more about that, you're going to want to sign up on our website, to be on our email list, become a member. That's always one thing we want to encourage people. That helps you do two things: support the museum, but also have your linkage for things like our newsletter and other stuff. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast because we'll obviously be coming back to this again.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a date for this exhibit on the
Yeah, it'll be mid-June, I think.
Okay, this is the Indigenous Peoples.
Yeah, we want to talk about that especially. Our next exhibit here is going to be on the history of Indigenous peoples, but we're going to try to take it not from this white historian perspective. We're going to do this from an authentic Indigenous perspective, where we've been collaborating with plenty of all the local tribes in the region, as well as activist groups, different kinds of people like that, just to get proper and authentic perspective of the history of Indigenous people in this area, because it's super important, especially now. We had the Prairie Band, who just got the reservation at Chabanais restored back to them by the state of Illinois, making them the first federally recognized tribe in our state since 1833. Which is a huge, massive,
Amazing.
amazing what's been happening there. There's also the McKee House Restoration Project, which is run by the Midwest Soaring Foundation. I want to give them they're participating into trying to make it a cultural center for Indigenous peoples, and that'd be in Glen Allen at Churchill Woods. Out here, we're also trying our best to let's see, we're going to be doing a lot of different work in the future, so I want to keep you updated with this, and we'll be doing a podcast about Indigenous history, but as right now, we'll keep you tuned in there. Mid-June, though, we'll be starting.
And I'll get as much of this in terms of linkage for the websites and stuff like that. We'll put it in the show notes for this podcast. But, well, I want to thank you. You've done a lot of work on this. You've been working really hard, and I guess that's why we haven't been able to have...
You too, though, Steve. Yeah, no, honestly, it's been buried in it, so yeah. Each one takes 40 pages, so it's a hefty thing.
It's exciting, and I'm looking forward to it personally, and I think it's going to be great for St. Charles, for the History Museum, and I think just the entire area to get this kind of nailed down to where we can tie one thing to the next, and you never know where you go from here, right?
Oh, exactly.
You're opening another door.
Every bit of information leads you to something brand new.
Yeah.
So it's a great rabbit hole to be in.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Steve.
Just a couple other things here before we go. We have our History Rocks event coming up on May 7th. There are still some tickets available for that. You're going to want to go to our website, and you will see a bar at the top of our website. You can click on it and buy your tickets. Just so you know, Rick Elvis Saucedo is going to be performing again. This year, all of our events are kind of centered around a 50s theme. We are also planning our holiday gala in December 12th this year. We're going to be returning to the Dunham Woods Riding Club, and we are going to be doing kind of a formal 50s event, kind of one of those cool, Rat Pack type things, night out for people. We'll kind of have a lot of fun with that, I think. And we've got other things that we've got on the plan. We've actually got a sock hop planned for August 16th. Woo. Details are still being worked out about that. We're going to have a DJ, and we're going to celebrate kind of a gymnasium sock hop event with hula hoops and all sorts of stuff like
the ones
that.
they used to have at the Baker Community Center.
Exactly, at the Baker Community Center, no less. So that's going to be fun. That's on a Saturday, so I think that's going to be a fun thing, especially on August 16th, I believe is the date for that. And we look forward to seeing some of you when you come out to that. That's a family event, so the whole family is welcome to that. Other than that, stop by the museum. We're open Tuesday through Sunday from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Lots of stuff to see here. We've always got new items going on. And of course, we've got the world's largest collection of swag for St. Charles. So if there's something you're looking to give somebody to remind them of when they lived here, or if they're moving away, something to take with them from here, or if they just got here, welcome them by stopping in, picking up something here. So we really appreciate it. What have I forgotten, Eric?
We'll be doing our paddle boat tours at the end of the month, one Sunday last Sunday out there at the part of the St. Charles Park District, now doing the paddle boat river tours.
That's right. Yeah, we're the docents of choice, I think. Oh, and I just thought about it because I've been working on it this whole week. May 17th, we'll have our first live guided downtown walking tour. We have redone the entire, at least half of the tour, taking a slightly different route, added at least 6 homes, 7 different locations to it. So even if you've been on the tour before, might not be a bad time to come back out again. That's May 17th. I believe the tour will be at 1:30. If you're interested, stay tuned. It isn't currently live on the website, but you'll find out about it on Facebook for sure, or on our website. You'll see a pop-up when you go to it. The website is stcmuseum, all one word, .org. And again, I thank everybody for tuning in. Eric, I thank you for joining me.
I appreciate it, yeah.
And we'll do this again soon, okay?
Yeah, we got a lot coming.
All right. Take care. Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the St. Charles History Chronicle podcast. This content is copyright 2025, St. Charles History Museum, all rights reserved. Additional information on this episode and other podcast episodes is available at stcmuseum.org/podcast.
If you